A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zati Sharip. I'm from the National Hydraulic Research Institute of Malaysia, which is the National Water Research Institute under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of Malaysia. The topic of my presentation today is development of national lake water quality standards for sustainable management of lakes and reservoirs in Malaysia. The content of my presentation includes some introductions, research methodology, the proposed national lake water quality standard, and the challenges. Eutrophication of inland water is actually a prevalent issue in Malaysia. A preliminary study by Nahrim and the Academy of Sciences of Malaysia in 2005 found that more than 60% of our 90 major lakes were categorized as eutrophic. These are some of the photos of the eutrophic lakes, or probably hyper-eutrophic lakes. We have algae bloom incidents in various urban lakes, and we also have one water supply reservoir experiencing an algae bloom problems, and we have natural lakes experiencing macrophyte blooms. To address the eutrophication issues, the government of Malaysia, together, Nahrim and the Academy of Sciences actually conducted multi-stakeholder consultations to develop a strategic plan for sustainable management of lakes. And this strategic plan was finally approved by the National Water Resource Councils in 2012. And one of the strategy is for Nahrim to become a national center of reference for lake research and resources. And one of our role is to prepare a detailed action plan for sustainable lakes and reservoir management, which we prepared in collaboration with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. And this detailed action plan was accepted in 2013 in various states in Malaysia. One of the action plans underlying in the detailed action plan is to develop a national lake water quality standards for the purpose of enhancing research and rehabilitation works on lakes, and to support the management of lakes by providing the long-term sense of directions or targets. Why do we need these national lake water quality standards? Because currently we have limited water quality monitoring data for lakes compared to rivers in Malaysia. Rivers actually has been monitored since 1980s. But for the lakes, we hardly found many of the lakes is actually been monitored by the agency or research institutes. And if there are available data for lakes, these data is only based on a few parameters underlined by the Department of Environment Water Quality Index and the Carlson's Trophic State Index. So the lack of measurable water quality standards represent a serious threat to the lake's water quality and its ecosystem. And to achieve this national lake water quality standard, we propose a gradual process to engage stakeholders involved in lake management and public participation. So the need is to classify the standard based on the intended use, and the designated use is actually, the criteria is based on scientific judgment and available data. The methodology is actually a depth study based on review of national water quality standard in Malaysia and review of international lake water quality standards and consultation with various stakeholders through questionnaires, surveys, and workshops and meetings. Okay. In Malaysia, we have three main standards. The interim national water quality standards for Malaysia, which is actually monitored by the Department of Environment. This is applied for rivers. And then we have one particular lake, that is the Putrajaya Lakes, which has a dedicated Putrajaya Lake and wetland water quality standards. And it was developed by Putrajaya Corporation, and the purpose is to manage Putrajaya Lake as a recreational and primary body contact. And we also have the national standard for drinking water quality, which has been monitored by the Ministry of Health. And recently, the Ministry of Health in Malaysia is actually also developing a national water quality standard and guidelines for recreational water quality monitoring for coastal and fresh water. So in terms of parameters that we review, the number of parameters in the water quality standards and the Putrajaya Lake water quality standard is more or less quite similar, except for the the Putrajaya standard is actually monitor chlorophyll A, total phosphorus, and transparency, which are not monitored in the national water quality standard for Malaysia. while the national standard for drinking water and the standard developed by the Ministry of Health on recreational water focus more on human health. So the number of parameters is actually increasing. We have, and they actually monitor the organics and pesticides. We also look into various international lake water quality standards, such as the WHO water quality guidelines for recreational water, the Australian and New Zealand guidelines, the environmental quality standard for water pollution by the Japan, the EU Water Framework Directive, and the US EPA water quality standards. And the proposed National Lake Water Quality Standard, or the ambient standard, is actually based from the parameter and values from the Putrajaya Lake Water Quality Standards and the National Water Quality Standards and a draft of the Recreational Water Quality Standards. And these values were compared with other international standards and assessed based on Malaysian conditions. And the most stringent values were selected based on the classification. And we refined these standards, these proposed standards, after consultation with stakeholders. We have two main stakeholders. The first one is a stakeholders consultative forum, which was held in May, involving various government agencies involved in monitoring, such as Department of Environment, Ministry of Health, and then we also engaged 7 private sectors, mainly the water industry, and 14 researchers. And then we have another forum, which is the National Lake Research Committee. It's also a high-level committee, which involves pools of experts, as well as the officials from the ministry, especially the one controlling the funds for monitoring and so on. We also distribute questionnaires, and we have a one-to-one discussion with Ministry of Health, because their focus is protection of human health. And then we also have a discussion with Department of Environment on the protection of the environment. And we intend to have another workshops in August, which actually is a larger workshops, which we try to have all stakeholders, namely the state authority and state water authorities from every state in Malaysia, to discuss on these proposed standards. So there are 4 classes of standard, class A, B, C, and D, with the main intended use as shown here. The description is that class A is more towards primary body contact, such as bathing, diving, skiing, and windsurfing, while class B is for secondary body contact. And class C is more toward protection of aquatic life, used for fisheries, high diversities, and class D is more for general purpose or users. So these are some of the list of parameters of classifications in comparison to the DOE and the Putrajaya Lake Water Quality Standards. The main parameter that are actually been that varies between the class, namely is parameters like color, dissolved oxygen, total suspended solid, transparency, and turbidity. And we also focus on nutrients and inorganic, which are a main concern for us, especially for lakes. And we actually monitor all forms of nitrogens and total phosphorus and total nitrogens. We have stringent, we propose a stringent total phosphorus as well as total nitrogen for class A and class B. And one of the recommendations by the Ministry of Health is actually to include microbiological and waterborne disease. So in addition to the BOD, COD, and the coliforms that we monitor, that usually been monitored by DOE and Putrajaya, we include a few parameters like Leptospira, Giardia, and some Clostridium species, which is actually a concern because we have some case involving public health in using the recreational water. And one of the parameters here is cyanobacteria. These are not been monitored by the Putrajayas in Putrajaya standard as well as DOE, but it is recommended in the draft document for recreational water quality standards. And we are, because of the eutrophications and algae bloom problems, we are considering cyanobacteria count as one of the parameters. Okay, we also listed some of heavy metal parameter organic pesticides for the class A, and while the rest is we're not included. Okay, the criteria for selection of monitoring parameters were based on parameters that are widely monitored, that are monitored easily at relatively lower cost, like floatable pH transparency. And these are the list of monitoring parameters that we propose. We focus on physical-chemical parameters, nutrients, microbial constituents, and as well as total pesticides. We are not finalized in terms of total toxicants. Okay, the proposed standard is actually should be a non-binding, considered as the desired quality by the stakeholders, and will become the directional target for lake managers and research works. So the idea is to gradually improve these standards as more information and data gathered, and it will become a long-term vision of stakeholders to help them develop policy for their water catchment. So the role of this standard is for rehabilitation and water quality improvement projects, other research and conservation program, management of lakes, as well as monitoring by the Department of Environment. And in the future, when data collection is enough, they may use the information for enforcement and develop regulations. And we also intend to use this standard for public awareness and reporting. So the targeted stakeholders are scientists and researchers, state authority and state water authority, a regulatory implementing agency, and NGOs and community. So our major challenge is basically funding, because water quality monitoring is very expensive, especially if you want to use for management, rehabilitation, and conservation purposes. There are also issues in terms of water testing, because not all labs has very advanced instrumentations, so especially labs in the rural areas. And then the other challenge is inadequate understanding of lake ecosystem due to insufficient monitoring and a limited number of parameters that have been monitored. And what we propose is actually what to monitor. So in terms of monitoring, we haven't proposed in terms of depth, timing, frequency, and depends on lake conditions and type. These are some of the challenges. And one of the other challenges is in terms of ownership, because whether voluntarily and enforcement by the state authority or state water authority. Yep, I'm done. With that, I would like just to acknowledge various stakeholders in the consultative sessions, meetings, and surveys, especially the Ministry of Health, Department of Environment, and Department of Chemistry. Also, the study team members, in particular, Dr. Saim Suraman and Akasha Majizat, who is very instrumental in having the consultative sessions, and in particular, Ministry of Natural Resources for providing the funding for this project. And I would like to thank UNESCO, IHP, and Kyoto University for sponsorship for me to come to this symposium. And of course, Professor Masahisa Nakamura and Dr. Dimitar Yilnazov for recommending and suggesting me to about this symposium. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharip. So now we have some time for discussion. Who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Would you like? Yes.
That's okay, I can be loud and obnoxious. Just a comment. You know, we always mention that monitoring and equipment is expensive. I think we should avoid this because, or not avoid it, but not use it as an excuse. It's not meant to be a criticism of your talk, by the way. Yeah. You know, deterioration of water quality and pollutants in the environment have made certain segments of our economy very rich. And there's been an economic benefit from that. And I think the payback now, you know, is that we need to invest in these monitoring and assessment programs in order to best mitigate these effects. So I don't think we need to be ashamed of the fact that these are expensive. It's just part of paying back Mother Nature. And this issue comes up a lot, whenever we give presentations to audiences that say, well, you know, we can't afford this. But we can afford it when you consider the economic benefits that have occurred from polluting waterways and our streams. And I just wanted to get that out there because I think it's really important to keep things in perspective in that sense.
Thank you very much. To add something?
think it's really interesting discussion, because if we look into the costs, not the economics, but costs of the monitoring, of course it is expensive to have equipment and laboratories. But if we look at the economics of the water quality monitoring throughout the whole water cycle, and how the benefits we have from the regulations and monitoring, and as Professor Nakamura also presented in the first slide, I think the benefits are much more, maybe manifold times higher than the investments or costs of the monitoring. So I think in which context, in which perspective we talk about, I think, of course, if we would like really to build a laboratory and have equipment to monitor all those different types of pollutants, it's expensive. You have to have first capital investment, yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Sharip, do you have any comments?
Okay, concerning the, one of our approach is actually by having the standards, because we are in Malaysia, we have change from Malaysian plan from the 10 Malaysian plan to 11 Malaysian plan. So we propose having these standards so that for the 11 Malaysian plan starting next year, the regulatory bodies, the water authorities have the chance to actually apply for funding from the Economic Planning Unit and the Ministry of Finance. So this work is actually timely, that's one. And another one is that in response to your work, we actually, one of the meetings in the National Research Committee meeting, we highlight that in order to do a monitoring and rehabilitation of lakes, what we are trying to focus now is to do an economic analysis of the lakes, economic valuation of the lakes, and so we have this, by having this valuation of the lakes, and then we can tell to the Ministry of the one provide the fund, so that these are the cost and benefits. If you put more funds on these lakes and rehabilitating or monitoring this lake, these are the benefits that you get. So these are the approach that we are using in Malaysia.